Thank you for joining part 2 of Long's Peak Advisory's short educational video describing how your firm can create a GIPS Policies and Procedures document, also known as a GIPS P&P. As discussed in part 1 of this two-part series, GIPS-compliant firms are required to document how they comply with the GIPS requirements, as well as any recommendations that the firm chooses to follow. This document acts as the firm's internal representation of their GIPS compliance, and is intended to state the firm's policies and describe the procedures the firm follows to maintain compliance. In part 1 of this two-part series, we covered firm definition and definition of discretion. Now, in part 2, we will cover calculation methodology, books and records, composite definitions and rules, as well as error correction policies. Calculation methodology. While GIPS provides a framework for how to calculate performance, firms may have different methods for handling external cash flows, asset weighting portfolios, calculating dispersion, etc. The specifics of the methods used must be documented in the firm's GIPS P&P. This section is typically broken down to separately discuss portfolio-level calculation methodology and composite-level calculation methodology. The main consideration when establishing your firm's portfolio-level methodology is the treatment of external cash flows. Since the start of 2010, GIPS requires firms to revalue for all large cash flows. It is up to your firm to define the term large, but it should be defined based on when your firm feels that estimation methods such as modified DEETs lose their accuracy. Most portfolio accounting systems either value portfolios daily, essentially defining large as 0%, or value portfolios for all cash flows 10% or greater. Firms without a portfolio accounting system that are calculating their portfolio level performance more manually, for example in Excel, frequently use 20%, but higher than that is less common. With regard to composite level performance, the most important information to document is the method used to asset weight the portfolio returns to get the composite level performance results. This is typically achieved through one of the following three methods. 1. Asset weight each individual portfolio's return for the month based on each portfolio's beginning market value, and then sum the portfolio's weighted returns to get the composite return for the month. 2. Asset weight each individual portfolio's return for the month based on each portfolio's beginning market value, plus weighted cash flows, and then sum the portfolio's weighted returns to get the composite return for the month. Or 3. Aggregate the underlying data of all portfolios in the composite, and then calculate the performance for each month as if all of the aggregated data is for one large portfolio. This section should also include information regarding how the other required GIPS statistics are calculated, such as dispersion and 3-year annualized ex-post standard deviation. Here, it is important to note whether these statistics are calculated based on gross or net of fee returns. In addition, you'll need to state if they are calculated by your portfolio accounting system or an outside system such as Excel, and the specific standard deviation formula used to complete the calculation. Policies regarding books and records. Firms must be able to support all information included in GIPS-compliant presentations, as well as support that their client assets are real. This section of your GIPS P&P can outline the types of records that are maintained and in what format or location they are stored. Specifically, firms typically outline the types of documents they have. For example, custodial statements, records maintained within a portfolio accounting system, printed records from a former portfolio accounting system such as holding reports, transaction summaries, etc. In this section, it is also important to mention whether files are hard copy or electronic, whether they are maintained on-site or off-site, and if there's a limit to the amount of time they are stored. Composite definitions and rules. Firms must create policies to ensure that portfolios are placed in the appropriate composite for the correct time period. Defining composites and creating composite rules will help determine when a portfolio is included or excluded from a composite. The timing of the portfolio movement in or out of composites must be based on objective criteria that is outlined in this section of the firm's GIPS P&P. For example, for new accounts that are getting ready for composite inclusion, Firms typically either set a policy based on the amount of time passed since discretion was granted, or based on when the portfolio becomes fully invested, which must be clearly defined. If based on time, the policy may be written as portfolios are included in the composite at the start of the first full month under management. Alternatively, if based on when the portfolio becomes fully invested, the policy may be written to state portfolios are included in the composite at the start of the first full month after the portfolio is at least 90% invested in line with the strategy. The percentage set can be whatever your firm feels is appropriate, but you want to establish a clear threshold that can be followed. Simply stating fully invested is subjective and difficult to follow consistently. Other rules can also be documented in this section, such as minimum asset levels and significant cash flow thresholds to keep portfolios out of composites during periods where the intended strategy cannot be fully implemented. Minimum asset levels set for GIPS composite purposes are different than minimums your firm may set for marketing purposes. While your firm can state any marketing minimum desired for the portfolio sizes you hope to attract, the minimum set for composite inclusion must be based on the minimum amount needed to fully implement that strategy. For example, even if your firm states that your strategy has a $1 million minimum, portfolios accepted below this threshold must still be included in the composite if they can be managed the same as portfolios over $1 million. In this example, if you determine that below $500,000 you can no longer diversify the same way you do for larger portfolios, then $500,000 would be an appropriate minimum to set for composite inclusion purposes. A significant cash flow policy can be established if your firm is concerned with very large cash flows moving in or out of a portfolio. This significant cash flow threshold is different than the large cash flow threshold discussed in the calculation methodology section. While the large cash flow threshold is set to improve the mathematical accuracy of the performance calculation, the significant cash flow threshold is based on the size of a cash flow that disrupts the actual management of the portfolio. Significant cash flows often lead to distorted performance figures that are out of the portfolio manager's control in terms of timing or amount. Often, these cash flows affect the portfolio's performance and could distort the composite statistics. Firms that implement a significant cash flow policy establish a threshold for cash flows. Typically, these thresholds are determined based on the percentage of the portfolio's beginning of month market value. Any portfolio with cash flows that exceed this threshold trigger the temporary removal of the portfolio from the composite while trading takes place to accommodate the cash flow. Error correction policies. Firms must create materiality thresholds that predetermine the action required if errors occur in a compliant presentation. This section should include thresholds for all statistics as well as criteria for determining when errors in disclosures are material. Defining materiality thresholds can be difficult, but CFA Institute, in conjunction with the United States Investment Performance Committee, or USIPC, conducted a GIPS error correction survey seeking information regarding the typical materiality thresholds used by GIPS-compliant firms. We recommend reviewing the executive summary of this survey's results to get an idea of the thresholds that have been set by your peers. Typically, thresholds are set that define when an error becomes a material error. Anything above the threshold would require the firm to redistribute an amended GIPS-compliant presentation to any prospective client or clients that relied on the erroneous presentation. This amended GIPS-compliant presentation would also need to include a disclosure that explains the correction. Anything below the materiality threshold will only trigger a correction for future distributions, but no disclosure or redistribution of previously circulated presentations. Thank you for your time today. If you want to stay informed, subscribe to our blog and follow us on social media to ensure you don't miss future GIPS and performance-related educational updates. If you have any questions about how to become GIPS compliant, we would love to help. Longs Peak's professionals have extensive experience helping firms become GIPS compliant, as well as helping them maintain their compliance with the GIPS standards on an ongoing basis. Please email us at info@longspeakadvisory.com with your questions or to schedule a time for a call.